The death of God is about the drying up of a horizon of meaning and of a whole form of human life.
Where do we stand in the illusion it makes? What kind of space are we invited into?
The material relations between people become social relations between things. When we look at toasters, corn, and TVs,
we still, to a large extent, live in the interregnum between worlds, if you will, or between paradigms. Not many people in the history of the world have faced that.
Hello, Zero Books readers and viewers. Welcome to the Zero Books Basement. This is where you'll get vlogs and live video streams that are a bit more informal. And we'll be able to put more timely interventions forward, even as we try to rethink critical theory. In that spirit, I want to say a few things about what's going on in Iowa. As I'm writing the script for this video, the results aren't in for the first contest. Instead of actual results, the Democratic Party of Iowa has stalled. Their app broke down on the night of the vote, and in the end, the results of the Iowa caucus weren't reported. In fact, it wasn't until the next day that Troy Price gave a press interview, releasing about 62% of the results.
The reporting of the results and circumstances surrounding the 2020 Iowa Democratic Party caucuses were unacceptable. As chair of the party, I apologize deeply for this. Last night, we were faced with multiple reporting challenges and decided, out of an abundance of caution, to protect the integrity of the Iowa caucuses and their results by taking the necessary steps to review and confirm the data. A thorough, transparent, and independent examination of what occurred yesterday will follow.
Now, this is all a mess, but it's also incredibly fishy. In order to understand what's really going on, we have to think about what went on in 2016 when Sanders ran against Clinton. Back in 2016, Hillary Clinton got the most state delegate equivalents and beat Sanders by 0.2%. So the way it works at the Iowa caucus is that people decide which candidate they want to back, and then they move to the part of the room that is the declared space for their candidate. Then they're counted. The candidates with less than 15% support are declared non-viable. People backing those candidates have an opportunity to lend their support to somebody else and be viable, and then a new count is taken, and the state delegate equivalents are factored out based on the second round counting. Back on Monday, this happened numerous times, and here's one example. In one precinct, the second alignment looked like this: 116 votes or people for Bernie, 82 people for Warren, 73 people for Buttigieg, and 11 people who refused to become aligned in the second round, probably Yang people. So the delegates, or the delegate equivalents that were assigned, went like this: 2 for Bernie, 2 for Warren, and 2 for Buttigieg. This came out this way because they somehow had 6 delegates to divvy up, and the rule is to round up at 0.5, or half of the delegate. So what you do is you multiply the number of people by the number of delegates or delegate equivalents, and then divide by the total number of people. For Bernie, you had 116 people. You multiply that by 6, divide by 285 people in the room, and you get 2.44 delegate equivalents, or state delegate equivalents. For Warren, it was 82 times 6 divided by 285. That's 1.72 state delegate equivalents. And for Buttigieg, it was 73 times 6 divided by 285, and that equals 1.53 delegates, or delegate equivalents. So when you round that, you have Bernie at 2, Warren at 2, and Buttigieg at 2. Now, after Clinton won in Iowa by less than 1% of the state delegate equivalents, the Sanders campaign asked for some rule changes. They thought they'd likely won most of the support in Iowa, but due to rounding and coin flips, sometimes ties are decided by coin flips in this process, they lost by a tiny margin in terms of these state delegate equivalents. Now, because of the rule change this year, rather than being given the count of state delegate equivalents only, we're supposed to also get tallies of both the first and second alignment votes or counts of people in support. At this moment, we can't say for sure if Sanders got the most support in Iowa. In 2016, we surely can't, but we can say that this year, with 75% of the results tallied and released, Sanders got the most support in Iowa so far, but he's down by 1.7% in state delegate equivalents. Now, the need to keep a record of all the steps in this process was one of the reasons the results that were delayed, or at least that's what we're told. Another reason maybe is that the app they were using to report the results was made by a tech startup company with ties to the old Clinton campaign and to the Buttigieg campaign. Buttigieg actually gave money. He donated or contributed something like $82,000 to the company that made the app called Shadow Inc. But the real travesty here, I think, is that the Democratic Party in Iowa chose to release partial results of the caucus in dribs and drabs, and has been doing so over the past few days, rather than wait for 100% of the results to be reported. That is, they chose to report a partial count that didn't include many precincts that were Sanders' strongholds, or that's what I've heard. And the result is that they reinforced the idea that Buttigieg had won Iowa, rather than wait to see what the final result would be. Now, remember, Buttigieg announced he'd won the night when there had been no results given. Anyway, on the night of the caucus, I spent something like 5 hours at my computer, flipping back and forth between tabs, watching NBC News, ABC News, our own Michael Brooks at The Hill, and now this and CNN, and I kept refreshing or flipping back and forth. Now I'm refreshing every 5 minutes to see what the latest Iowa results are. But as I've been obsessing about this, I've also been thinking about, history. What is the nature of the Democratic Party? What is its history? And why is it that these caucuses are so confused and confusing? On the night of the caucus, all the mainstream reporting and most of the caucus goers treated this caucus as kind of a nostalgic novelty and as an example of communal decision-making and civic participation. In our modern, atomized, hurried lives, where we rarely come together at all. We bowl alone, we consume media alone, we barely know each other. And the caucus reminds us that there was once a time when politics wasn't about advertising dollars, but was about town hall meetings and rigorous debates. Politics were decided not by technocratic number crunchers poring over spreadsheets, but by personal relationships. Whether or not Sanders won a caucus might have come down to whether or not old Joe had returned to old Bob's lawnmower when he promised to, or whether Martha's cat was leaving droppings in her neighbor's yard. In other words, they would have to talk to each other and try to convince each other on who to support. If the relationship was good, maybe one candidate would win over the other based on that. But this rosy picture ignores a few facts about American politics. First being, and this is kind of interesting, that there are no provisions for political parties in the U.S. Constitution. In 1796, George Washington announced he was going to retire from the presidency in a letter published in Philadelphia. And in that letter, he warned against what he called the spirit of the party. Here's what he wrote. The unity of government which constitutes you one people is a main pillar in the edifice of your real independence, your tranquility at home, your peace abroad. But as it is easy to foresee that from different causes and from different quarters, much pains will be taken to weaken in your minds the conviction of this truth, you should properly estimate the immense value of your national union to your collective and individual happiness, indignantly frowning upon the first dawning of every attempt to alienate any portion of our country from the rest, or to enfeeble the sacred ties which now link together the various parts. The North, in an unrestrained intercourse with the South, finds in the productions of the latter great additional resources of maritime and commercial enterprise, and precious materials of manufacturing industry. The South, in the same intercourse, benefiting from the agency of the North, sees its agriculture grow and its commerce expand. I've already intimated to you the danger of the parties and the state, with particular reference to founding them on geographical discriminations. Let me now take a more comprehensive view and warn you in the most solemn manner against the baneful effects of the spirit of party generally. This spirit, unfortunately, is inseparable from our nature, having its roots in the strongest passions of the human mind. It exists under different shapes, in all governments more or less stifled, controlled, or repressed, but in those of the popular form it is seen in its greatest rankness, and is truly their worst enemy. The alternate dominion of one faction over another, sharpened by the spirit of revenge, natural to party dissension, is itself a frightful despotism. But this leads at length to a more formal and permanent despotism. The disorders and miseries which result gradually incline the minds of men to seek security and repose in the absolute power of an individual. Now, there's something very counterintuitive here. That is, the Founding Father and the Founding Fathers in general didn't understand the role of the federal government to be about managing competing interests, but rather saw their aim to be the facilitating of the administration of the decisions of free men, admittedly free white landowning men, who would use the state to defend against foreign powers and to ease the development of their industrial and productive power. The state was there to make it easier for people to cooperate together and provide for the common good. The development of political parties was a result of conflicts from within their own ranks. Different geographical interests divided up Washington. The development of political parties was the result of conflicts within their own ranks. Conflicts between different geographical interests, as Washington saw it. Now, some of the Marxists I most align with talk about the Marxist project as a project to overcome politics. For instance, Anselm Japp, the author of the book The Writing on the Wall, once said that he is anti-political in the same way that the avant-garde artists of the 60s and 70s were anti-art. The rejection of art in the case of the Dadaists, the Surrealists, or the Situationists, which was not a rejection of artistic means, but to the contrary, it was conceived as the only way to remain faithful to the original intentions of art. But can any of us think that politics is a social sphere that would allow us to put limits on the logic of capital? That politics is democratic by nature and opposed to the capitalist economic world where the law is that the strongest rules? This may sound idealistic and ultra-leftist, but when you realize that George Washington was also opposed to politics, or at least to the formation of factions, and through them, formation of political parties, this ultra-leftism can be seen in a new light. It's also useful to consider what Lukács wrote in his essay on class consciousness. He wrote, "The class consciousness of the bourgeoisie is geared to economic consciousness, and indeed the highest degree of unconsciousness, the crassest form of false consciousness, always manifests itself when the conscious mastery of economic phenomena appears to be at its greatest. From the point of view of the relation of consciousness to society, this contradiction is expressed as the irreconcilable antagonism between ideology and economic base." So when people on the far left talk about the socialist project as a project to realize the ambitions of the bourgeoisie, what they mean is that socialists should aim to make the ideology of the bourgeoisie practical, which should aim to overcome the economic base that comes into conflict with the ideals of the bourgeoisie. For instance, George Washington, Anselm Japp, and Karl Marx are all set against politics as we know it. That is, as a competition of factions for their own interests, as against the collective needs and interests of the social whole. So what I think this means is that when we get involved in U.S. party politics, we should keep in mind we're no more likely to succeed in overcoming the internal difficulties of the system than George Washington was. And when the establishment breaks down, when it breaks its own rules, or when its rules are Byzantine and riven with contradictions, we shouldn't be surprised. After all, the formation of political parties as we know them already represents a failure of the original system. The fact that the Democratic Party even exists is a sign of the failure of the bourgeoisie and their effort to realize their own dreams. Thanks for watching this Zero Books video. If you enjoyed it, subscribe to this channel and click on the notifications bell so that you'll be alerted whenever we release a new video. You should also consider supporting us on Patreon. Our patrons get access to our Inside Zero Books podcast every week and can get access to the Zero Books Book Club and help us to continue making online content from the left.